Welcome back, everybody. I'm sharing
Yeah.
my
Jay,
screen.
Jay just called like 1 minute ago and we're playing phone tag to on the rabbi's class.
Uh-huh.
Is he trying to hook up?
Okay, it's 2 o'clock there. It's a reasonable time, so it depends on his schedule, whatever. Okay, so we are in the Nefesh HaHaim Sha'ar Gimel Perek Ches, and I actually prepared a schematic diagram for us tonight, something sort of risque, but I hope you appreciate it for what it is. So we've been talking, we're deep into the Tzimtzum, the way Hashem created the world. There's a revelation through concealment, which is like an oxymoron. I want to share with you the mashal that actually comes from the Sefer Tanya. And we're going to learn tonight. I actually have done a lot of reading of Rabbi Frankel. In his second volume of the Nefesh Tzimtzum, he goes through the history and he concludes through his really meticulous historical research that actually the Nefesh HaChaim, the Arizal, the Vilna Gaon, and the Rebbe Michabad, they do not disagree on this topic of the Tzimtzum and how everything works. There was a perceived disagreement, and many people thought the Hasidim thought one thing and the Misnagdim thought something else. But Reb Dessler came to this conclusion, and Reb Frankel comes to this conclusion. He's forced to say that the last Lubavitcher Rebbe, Reb Schneerson Zatzal, who he has a great deal of respect for, made an error not in Torah but in historiography. There's a letter ostensibly in the name of the Balatanya, which is condemning people who are smart in their own eyes, and saying they misunderstand the Tzimtzum. And so some people think that's the Balatanya arguing against the Vilna Gaon, but Frankel and Reb Dessler, they show it can't be. The Balatanya never spoke disrespectfully about the Vilna Gaon. He was very careful not to, and he always kept silence against those who were his detractors. And it's well known today by historical scholars that this letter from the Balatanya is a phony. It's a fake. So it was published, long after he died. It was like as if it were in his handwriting and he wrote it, but he really didn't. And the Lubavitcher Rebbe did not know that. He thought it was a real letter. And so he assumes that there is a machlokes between the Balatanya and the Vilna Gaon, but in point of fact, there's really not. So that's, first of all, it's good to know that Klal Yisrael is together on this important issue of how the world works, how the Tzimtzum works, and so forth. And what I want to share now, of course, we're learning Nefesh HaChaim from Chaim Belazhin, the Talmud of the Vilna Gaon, and I want to share a mashal, a certain metaphor that the Balatanya uses it a number of times in the Tanya, and it's just so great because it's so vivid. He talks about the sun, okay, which is a very, very hot and bright, orb of burning gas. And imagine within the sun, whether it's a candle or an incandescent light bulb or a photon or a spark or electron, some small light, something that, a spark that in the dark would provide some light. But put that, let's say put that candle on the surface of the sun, okay? How much light does it give? How important is it? The answer is it would like immediately cease to exist because it's quote 1,000,000 degrees on the surface of the sun. So the existence of that candle is essentially null and void. Okay, even though that candle is a source of light, a candle is very important. Every mitzvah, ner mitzvah, v'torah or. So a candle is important, but if you put a candle in the sun, it's like it doesn't exist. Now God is bigger than the sun and brighter than the sun, and we're not a candle. So in terms of understanding the Tzimtzum, you have to understand that for Hashem to reveal his great light in respect to who we are and what we can perceive, it won't go. It's too bright. You can't perceive anything within the great glory of God. It's too overwhelming. There's too much brightness and wattage there. So everything is null and void regarding a Kadosh Baruch Hu. So ein od milvado kipshuto mamish, right? That nothing else exists because God is so bright and great and whole and complete and perfect that nothing exists in his presence. And yet, we exist. We're here and we perceive the world. The world exists. And don't say that the world is just an illusion that doesn't really exist, because there were those that wanted to understand the Tzimtzum that way. That God, he put a shade on the sun. He turned it down. He constricted it. Okay, and so it's not as bright as it used to be, so that to make room for the universe to be created. You don't want to say that for a number of reasons. The main one being God doesn't change. God did not change when he created the world. So he did not constrict his light and make himself a less bright light. That can't be. That's like, it's apicorsis. You can't say that. So how can we reconcile that God is this bright light that doesn't allow for the existence of anything else? Everything else is dead and nullified in his presence. And yet here we are. So this is what the Nefesh HaHaim has been working hard to do, to create two different perspectives. From Hashem's perspective, he's the only thing and nothing has ever changed. From our perspective, there is a concealment. Hashem has, let's say, covered himself, concealed himself, so that it appears to us that God is out there in the heavens and he's great, but we're here and the world exists from our perspective, and it really does. And we are obligated to behave according to the norms and the reality of this world. That's what the Torah is about, doing Torah and mitzvahs within the revealed world. But the world became revealed because Hashem concealed himself. So the duality of concealment and revelation are really closely related, okay? And I'm going to take it one step further, and before I even get into the text of Nefesh HaChaim, I'm going to share my schematic. And they have sort of an elegant solution to how this works. And so now I'm going to put that up on the screen. And that is, it has to do with the Esser Spherois and where the Tzimtzum takes place. So, I ask your forgiveness for my daring that I've created a schematic, and it's a little bit tongue-in-cheek. Concatenation is a word for hishtalshelus, when something is a chain of something. Like in computers, they have concatenations of chains of things. Oh, here comes our American correspondent. Here comes Jay. Welcome, Jay Popko from America. Nice to have you join us. So I'm sharing a diagram that I created today. It's a little bit of a chutzpah to even make such a diagram, and so I'm asking mechila from you and from HaKadosh Baruch Hu, but I thought it would help us discuss this topic. So I wrote concatenation of reality and not drawn to scale. That's a joke, because this is the whole universe. Okay, and so we're starting at the top, and I wrote not pictured for obvious reasons, Atzmuso Yizbarach. So I did not take a picture of God, Baruch Hashem, right? Because that's a no-no. Okay, so I start from Or Ein Sof, infinite light. And again, these are Kabbalistic terms that I've learned them through the Leshem, and the Nefesh HaChaim has been using them. And so we're coming from above, moving down, and we're going to get to the world in which we exist. We're going to get to the Zoom meeting. But we're starting at infinite light, which is called Or Ein Sof. And so you see I made it big and round, and it's everywhere, okay? Because we're long before the creation of the universe here, right? This is God before the universe is created. There's himself, which he's totally unknowable. We can say nothing about him, so we're going to say nothing. And we can't say much about infinite light, except that it's infinite light. So we're talking about the Or Ein Sof. Hi, Jay. Nice to see you. Well, thanks for tuning in from America.
Thank you. Good to be joining in.
Great. So I've made this schematic of the Tzimtzum in order to, answer this difficult philosophical question with a brilliant idea that particularly Rabbi Frankel explains it well in the second volume of his Nefesh Tzimtzum. So I'm starting at the top of reality with God, and I'm now in, let's say, the second tier, which is Or Ein Sof. And now, again, we're very, very early, and this is happening at every moment. It's not like this happened in history. This is still happening. God exists in this way and is unchanged. The next logical stage of this concatenation of reality is the Tzimtzum and the Kav, which we spoke about last week, and the Nefesh HaHaim continues to speak about them now in chapter 8. And I put the 0, 1, 0, 1, because I hold it's like binary. Like the Tzimtzum is God's concealment, so it's like a 0, and the Kav is like a 1, okay, like in binary. And we actually looked together at that picture that the Kabbalists make of a sphere with the line through the middle. I didn't put that on this page, but they also dared to make a picture. I didn't use their picture, but that's the stage called Kav and Tzimtzum, about concealment and revelation. And at that stage, from my perspective, the world, which doesn't exist yet, is in a binary phase of just God concealing and revealing. Okay. The next tier, the next level, is something called Adam Kadmon. Okay, I mean, we use that for prehistoric man. This is way before man. This is like supernal man. This is like, how can I say it? It's like a schematic of what man is going to be when God creates man. And it's comprised of like the spheroids, like the 10 spheroids. So I've broken the spheros here into just 4 groups. The first one is Keser Elyon, right? The crown above. That's the top one. And it sort of is related to Or Ein Sof. Okay, it's like infinite light in its character. It has no boundaries. The next 2 spheros, I call them mind, because they're Chochmah and Bina. So that's like stuff you know and your analysis of the information. So that's like mind. Okay, and the first 3 are often called Gimel Rishonos, Keser, Chochmah, and Bina. Okay, the next 6 are called Vav Ketzavois, and this is where Chesed, Gvura, Tiferas, Netzach, Hod, Yesod. This is like the body. These are right hand, left hand, the torso, the legs, right, the reproductive organ. That's Yesod. So that's the body. It corresponds like to 6 directions, like the X, Y, and Z axis. Okay, and again, although I'm speaking, Gashmius and body and stuff like that, this is all Ruchnius, and everything we say here is just a mashal. It's just imagery that we're using to try and talk about something which is very esoteric, but which does have a reality. And the reason I look like the way I do and you look the way you do, and our body is what it is because we were created in the image of God, and the image of God is also in the heavens. In the spiritual realm above the physical realm. And so we're talking about a very, very high spiritual realm right now, but it has a certain surah, it has a certain form. It certainly has no gashmius, something physical, so it's conceptual. So we're speaking conceptually. The last of the 10 spheroids is called Malchus, right? The kingship. And everything really takes place in Malchus. Okay, just like in a kingdom. In a kingdom, you have the king, of course, and the queen and the royal family, but you have a palace, and you have guards, and you have horses and donkeys, and you have a dungeon. There's probably criminals trying to assassinate the king, not to mention all the subjects. You have advisors to the king, and you have loyal subjects and disloyal subjects. All of those things exist in Malchus. So Malchus is very, very broad and inclusive of everything we know in our reality. And we say in Ashrei, Malchusecha Malchus kol oilamim. When we say Malchuscha Malchus kol oilamim, God, your Malchus is the kingdom of all worlds. That means that the kingdom that we live, where we say Hashem is Baruch Atah Hashem Elokeinu, Melech HaOilam. God is the king of this world. He makes the apples, Borei Priya Eitz. And he asher kiddushanu b'mitzvaysav etzivanu laniach tefillin. He commanded us to put on tefillin. That's the king of the world. That's God. We live in God's malchus. The malchuscha malchus kol olamim, and the malchus that we live in really ascends upward, and is part and parcel of these highest malchuyot that exist in very, very high spiritual worlds. So everything is interconnected. So it's a very, very sophisticated model, okay? And it takes flexibility to appreciate its depth. Anyway, right now, we're talking about after the Or Ein Sof and after the Tzimtzum in the Kav, there's a paradigm called Adam Kadmon. And the 10 spherois, let's call them, are perceptible on that level of Adam Kadmon. Beneath that, and we're getting closer and closer to the reality that we recognize, are 4 worlds called Abia, which is Atzilus, Bria, Yetzira, and Asiya. Okay, so those are abbreviated as Abia. And we live in Asiya. So the very bottom of this schematic in the Malchus of Asiya, that's where we are. And I wrote here Bereshis Bara, because if this first one is Atzilus, the second one is Bria, this is where God created the world, Bereshis Bara. Okay? On the level of these 10 spheros of the world of Bria, that's the creation. And then we're lower than that. You know, then there's the world of Yetzira, and then there's the world of Asiya in which we find ourselves. The angels are here, the Kisei HaKavod is up here. Again, it's a schematic, and we're just talking about ideas. But I tried to give a sense of concatenation, of things coming down from the top towards the bottom, and we're here at the very bottom, and we exist, and we're looking up at the heavens, and we can see what we can see. But here's now the kicker, okay? What we said so far is, you know, fundamentals and creating shapes in our mind and putting things together. There's a unique relationship between Keser, which is the top, and it's like Or Ein Sof, and Malchus, which is the bottom. And if you think about those 2 words in English, Keser, crown, and Malchus, kingship or kingdom, the crown and the kingdom are very closely related, right? What was the Netflix show about the Queen of England, right? It was called The Crown.
Crown.
Yeah. So here's the really fascinating thing. On this diagram, there's 5 different levels, all having 10 spheroids in them. And the relationship between the different levels is such that the top of the lower one matches the bottom of the previous higher one. So I'll say it like the Malchus of Adam Kadmon overlaps with the Keser of the Olam Atzilus. And those are almost the same thing. Like, let's call it the light. The light of Malchus of Adam Kadmon is illuminating and filling the Keser of the Olam Atzilus. And it goes down to the Malchus of Atzilus, and that is like the light and illumination of the Keser of Bria. And the Bria exists down to its Malchus, and the Malchus of Bria overlaps with the Keser of Yetzira. And that continues down, and the Malchus of Yetzira corresponds and illuminates the Keser of Asiya. Okay? So there's this very important relationship between all these different levels, and they're related. The top of one is the bottom of the one above it, okay? And so now here's the Vort that Rabbi Frankel says to explain the philosophical difficulty. How can God have concealed himself without having changed at all, okay? And the answer that he gives, and he's giving it b'shem the Balatanya as well as the Vilna Gaon and the Arizal, and he says everybody agrees to this, is that the tzimtzum, the concealment, only takes place in Malchus, okay? It only takes place in the lowest emanation of each level. So it takes place in the Malchus of Asiya and the Malchus of Yetzira, Bria, Atzilus, the Malchus of Adam Kadmon, and he says even, although there are not 10 spheros that are perceptible in Or Ein Sof, but if we would project, if we would extrapolate 10 spheros onto Or Ein Sof, the Or Ein Sof remained as it was it was only mitzumtzam, that tzimtzum only occurred in the malchus of Or Ein Sof. But the rest of it continued, let's call it shining, existing, illuminating, and emanating as it did before anything happened. So that is like a philosophical idea to answer this question, that the tzimtzum and the kav and the perception, the concealment, which gives room for the revelation of the creation of the universe, all takes place only in Malchus. But in the levels higher than Malchus, everything as it is, as it was before the world was ever created or brought into being.
But does that change? But does that change the idea? Does that undo the claim or the question of whether there's a shinoi in Hashem's existence or being or how he manifests, if it's taking place on some of the levels, not all the levels? I mean, is it putter? Does that mivatel the argument?
I think it does, because the Malchus is just like the transmitter of this thing. It's like it's not the thing itself, it's the stuff coming out of the thing. Okay, so God's essence is unchanged. Only his projection,
the communication of it.
Yes, the hiskashrus, right? The interaction with it has changed, but the thing itself is unchanged. That's how I sort of understand it. Okay, so I shared, as I said, a provocative schematic that I created. I hope it did something for you. Jay, do you want to say something?
I was just thinking that, the tzimtzum, I don't know, did we say or did we discuss this? That the tzimtzum is only from our perception. And the malchut is kind of like an emanation that allows us to perceive, something spiritual, something above us, and we can't really see it. We can't.
No, you can't see it.
But it's again, weren't we saying that that the tzimtzum was really basically that it's there, but we can't really perceive it, or that it's just not there.
It's the tzimtzum occurred. It's a prerequisite for the existence of other things to exist, and we do exist. And so Hashem did a process called tzimtzum and kav in order to bring other stuff into existence. And yet Hashem is unchanged. So the Nefesh HaHaim has built the paradigm. From God's perspective, nothing has changed, but from our perspective, the tzimtzum has occurred, and that's how we can perceive our own existence.
Yeah.
Okay.
How does this fit into this concept? The malchut is basically our perception of the divine.
Exactly.
Where we potentially we could perceive it, but we don't really.
As much as we say Hashem Melech, Hashem Malach, Hashem Yimloich Lo'olam Va'ed, right? We perceive God's malchus. We call God Melech HaOlam. So we exist in God's malchus. We live in a world that God is the king. God is much more than king. Because remember, a king did not create his subjects. He rules over them, but he didn't create them. So God is much more than king. And yet we refer to God as king because that is how he has, he gave us the Torah and the book of laws to relate to him as king. So, Birshuskan, I'm going to continue now with the text and begin chapter 8 about this. And it's one of those chapters we've seen the Nefesh HaHaim, he tells us stuff and then he sort of says, be careful with this and don't go too far and run back and be safe. So that's one of these. So I just ran forward. I'm now going to run back. V'lachei nesar chakira v'izboinenus b'mahut inyan hatzimtzum. So he talks about a prohibition to contemplate or research the true nature of the tzimtzum, and we're not doing that because we don't know how to do that. Like the Rizal says, "Shelo hurshenu lizboinen klal leidav lahasig mahut inyan mekoimo shel olam." We can't truly understand how Hashem is mekoimo shel olam. Ech shakol male rak achduso apashu yizbarach. How everything is actually only full of God's indivisible oneness. Ve'enod milvado klal legamre mitzido yitbarach, and that there's really nothing else but God. Ve'emes shehu bichlal, and that idea is included in a Mishnah in Chagiga. She'ele v'chakira malifnim. What's going on in there? Shalimduhu zal in Perik Ein Dorshim. It's the second parak of Chagiga. Mikatuv misha ki sha'alna liyamim rishonim lemin hayom asher bara Elokim Adam. Ve'iyata shoel before that. So I did want to share that on the screen. The Mishnah in Chagiga. The Mishnah in Chagiga is talking sort of about curriculum. What are you allowed to teach, or to how many students, under what circumstances? So ein dorshin be'arayos b'shloisha, v'lo b'maaseh bereshis b'shnayim, v'lo b'merkava b'yachid. You can't teach this stuff, casually. You have to be really careful with the Pnimius HaTorah. The only way you could teach the Merkava, even to a single student, is im kein haya chacham umevin midaito. So it's a person who's a sophisticated student who understands things on his own. Then you're allowed to disclose to him certain, understandings and kabbalas. Kol hamistakel ba'arba dvarim roi lo ki'ilu lo bala oilam. Malamala, malamata, malifnim, umale achor. So this Mishnah in Chagiga is warning us and saying a person who is investigating things that he should not is in big trouble. Okay, it's worthy that he never would have existed. The kol shelo chasal kvoid koinoi ro'oilo shelo bala oilam. If you don't have respect for your maker, it's better that you wouldn't have been created. So this question of malamata, malifnim, malachor, what exactly does that mean? What is a person asking when he's asking what's inside or what's behind it all, and so forth? So I'm just sharing with you the Bartanura. Malamala miroshei achayot. Okay, in the Maisim cover, right? There's the chayos and the oifanim. And so you ask, what's above the heads of the chayos? Or malamata mitachas la'aretz. What's beneath the earth? And again, it doesn't mean the core of the earth or the lava. It means spiritually. Malifnim chutz lemechitzas harakia b'mizrach. What's over the rainbow? What's over the eastern horizon? What's there? And again, I don't think it's a science question. I think it's a spiritual question. And you have to know your boundaries of what you're allowed to ask and investigate. Umale achor. What's back there in the west? Perush acher. Malifnim. Malifnim means koidem shenivra oilam. Male achor. Besof ha'oilam la'achris hayamim. So what was going on before the creation of the world? What's going to be after the world? Again, you can ask casually. And, the Rambam has some stuff about it. And the Kabbalah is talking about these, but it has to be done with respect. Kol shelo chasal kvoid koino. If you don't behave with respect towards Hashem, you're in hot water. So we are trying to behave, of course, with respect and pursue this within boundaries. So the Nefesh HaHaim, though, did bring that Mishnah here, talking about caution in discussing the Tzimtzum. So here we go. V'arizal asher hursha v'hifli legalot sodot amukim v'ramim. The Arizal did allow himself to reveal really deep stuff. Kvar perush huzal shepnimius kavanas akasuv lemin hayom asher bara Elokim Adam hu al oilam adam kadma. So we talked tonight about adam kadma, and here he uses the Aramaic adam kadma. And he says that pasuk is talking about that. And again, we can mention him and know a little bit about it, but we can't fully try to research, what is that and what is the essence of it, because it's unknowable, because we're talking about emanations of the divinity above human capacity to understand. V'gam be'inyan ak aleph kuf is Adam Kadmon. Gam be'inyan ak katav she'ein anachnu rishayim ledaber v'lachkor be'inyan atzmus pnimiuso. Even regarding this terminology that we use, we don't have permission to fully discuss and investigate what it really is in its inner essence. Rak be'oiros hayoitzim, only the light that comes out of it. Oiros hayoitzim imenu levad, v'gam zot rak me'oiros desag. Okay, I want to share another concept here that the Nefesh HaHaim makes reference to, and that is sag versus av. Think of the Shem Yud Ke Vav Ke, okay, and spell that out. Yud, Yud Vav Dalid, Hey. How do you spell Hey? Well, there's three different ways to spell Hey. You could spell Hey, Hey Aleph, Hey, or Hey Yud. Vav, how do you spell Vav? Well, you could spell Vav, Vav. You could spell it Vav Aleph Vav, or you could spell it Vav Yud Vav. And the same thing with the last Hey. So if we were trying to write the Shem Yud Ke Vav Ke, God's name, we could write it in a bunch of different ways, but the Kabbalists use four main ways. And the four main ways are called by their gematria: 72, 63, 52, and 45. And so they're called Av, Ayin Beis, 72, Sag, 63, Ban, 52, and Ma, 45, based on what's filling the haze. Interestingly, the Yud is always Yud Vav Dalid. It's always 20, it never changes. But the haze, which are representative of the feminine, of the receptacle, they change. The receptacles change, whether it's a Hey Yud, Hey Aleph, or Hey. So the feminine aspect changes, and these are, quote, different personas. This is Hashem behaving, relating to us in different ways. And so the Nefesh HaHaim here is saying, regarding Adam Kadmon, we can only relate to the oiros, to light that is extending outward, only from the level of the second level, which is called Sag, the 63 level of Yud Ke Vav Ke, but not from the light that comes from the Ayin Beis, the 72 level, which is even higher. So again, he's putting boundaries, what we're allowed to talk about, what we could possibly understand, some aspects of it. So again, to me, it's fascinating. Kol shekain shelo horshenu lizboinen chalila b'mahus inyan tzimtzum. So the tzimtzum is above Adam Kadmon. So there's no way we could really talk and understand about it. K'fi asher hu mitzido yitbarach, the way it is from God's perspective. Rak be'inyan hakav, hainu, b'ishtalshelus ha'olamois shek'fi hasagatenu, b'zehu shehemik hirchiva dibur. The Arizal, he didn't write. He taught it to Chaim Vital, and we have, a lot of Sfarim that are the Arizal's teaching. And so the Nefesh HaChaim is clarifying that all the teachings of the Arizal are only from a certain place and downward, but there are places where he dared not, where he's not allowed to disclose, or we're not allowed to discuss or investigate, because those are beyond our fathoming, something like that. Yes, Steve.
Oh, I don't want to ruin your rhythm.
That's okay, go ahead.
No, it's a big topic for me. One edge of it is, so why are the Kabbalists motivated to get into all this stuff, since most of it's totally beyond human understanding and dangerous to the individual. So, and I have my own personal evidence to back that up. So, and I tend to avoid Kabbalah because I looked at the answer sheet. So
okay,
what motivates Kabbalists? Are they, and even like you bring up a philosophical contradiction that you have to go this way and that way. Who cares about our philosophical contradictions? They're at a very low level of things we think we understand. you know, it's like irrelevant. It's like a frog in Africa, talking to Joe Biden or something, you know. We're really out of our league on this stuff, and I'm wondering who handles this healthily and who doesn't, and why. Uh, that's not the only thing. And I will say that, first of all, when they talk about light, they're talking about spiritual light, and we cannot fathom what that is. I mean, we need goggles to look at a solar eclipse. So, and you're talking about something that would be like nothing in comparison.
Okay.
The other thing is we do mitzvot to strengthen ourselves to become better vessels to absorb or handle the substantial divine light that's out there. Okay.
Yes.
And they say, you can't see God, and if you look at God, you'll die. So I experienced that. That was not a fun experience. I do not know what people are getting out of this type of thing. I realize that he wants to compete with people he's afraid will be pulled off into a bad direction. Um, and I did experience the feeling like a candle. That was my exact experience in the presence of an infinite number of suns. And it was a feeling like, um, yes, I existed as a small flame, but it was nothing to write home about. Like in comparison, I had no existence. And so, and that plagued me for a long time afterwards. Like I had, you tossed around the question of, do we exist or not? I'm not, I, I, I went many months figuring that I felt like a figment of my own imagination, which is an awkward way to work in a professional capacity. Let me say that, you know.
Yes.
Uh, and you have to experience death to really get into this, and that's one way of keeping yourself humble, I suppose. Um, but it's ego death. Um, I'm just saying this is not fun and games at all, and I actually wonder why people are even trying to figure this out philosophically when we don't have the tools to do that. You drop the word unfathomable, something like that. Well, it is. So why are we trying to hone up these concepts or figure out the gematria of this, that, and the other thing? It just I don't want to be cynical about it, but we were only given a set of eyes to, for the most part, experience physical light, much later, and and I think how we fancy the universe after looking at this kind of stuff is an illusion. That's all. It's so far beyond our ken. It's not even funny.
Steve, I think, you mentioned the universe. I think the people who pursue this, or the Gedolim or the Talmidei Chachamim who pursue this, they are the astronauts into this spiritual cosmos.
I don't believe in
And
that either. But
and I think that mankind in general just has this exploratory drive.
Yeah.
And it was only in the last, century that we or less that we could imagine going into space. It was unfathomable. So, suppressing, telling, the Gaonim, I don't mean the real Gaonim, I mean geniuses who have the capacity to understand more than, the average person. It's very hard to keep them down. So they will
I don't
try to
need to
forge
keep
into
them
this.
down. I think they have a little too much confidence in their intellect.
That could be.
So we want to
And
know.
I equate that with some college professors I've run into over the years.
But man wants to know, and God
Man
gave
wants to know,
Torah.
so inquiring minds want to know, you know?
Exactly.
Anyway, I just thought I'd say that, and that's why I shy away from this stuff, and I'm hearing a lot of philosophical considerations in all this that I think are at a much lower level, okay? And it's, I know they'll talk about the whole concept of being stronger vessels, and I assume they're going to get into that at some point, no?
Okay, yes.
To vessels for what? The divine light, correct?
Yes.
So to me, it's really quite central in it, and it gets down to what people can actually. It should give them more of a picture of what their mitzvot are about and acquiring wisdom and things like that. So I don't want
Yep.
to ramble on, but
The
I hope
fourth
some of
paragraph,
this was coherent.
it was coherent, and we appreciate it. And I like Shimon's mashal of astronauts going to space. Like, what's the point? Are we really going to get to the end of the universe? No, but we want to know, and we want to experiment. We want to learn more.
Is
And we
there
have a
really
mitzvah,
life on Earth? You know,
their life on Earth. We want to understand the world that we live in, and understand our relationship
I
to
get
God,
it.
and understand ourselves. So we have to use everything that we have and what was given to us by great rabbis like the Arizal and so forth.
Okay,
So
I just threw in my 2 cents,
I appreciate it.
and
But I'm defending the mission, that it's a meaningful
everyone fights me off.
the Seder. So I'm finishing up the paragraph at least, where he's telling us what the Arizal did and didn't do. Aval be'inyan atzimtzum diber bo beratzo v'shov. We talked about that before, about running and then going back, retreating. So regarding the tzimtzum itself, he proceeds and retreats. V'lo diber b'mahut inyano befratut. He could not, would not, did not describe it in detail. Ayin bereish sefer oitzos chayim. That's one of the Rizal's sfarim. Velo gileu rak mitziuso derech klal levad lechacham umevin midaito mitam shevadai roy laadam hayashar chacham levav hakavua kol hayamim betalmud Torah v'mitzvos asher ne'emana et el rucho leda mitziut zeh ha'inyan hanoira derech klal sha'adon yachid yizbarach shmo Male eskol, ve'ein od milvado yizbarach, lahalhiv mizeh, tohar kedushas machshavto. This is partially an answer to Steve's question. The Nefesh HaHaim is saying, what's the point of this? Why should you do this? You should do this for hitlahavut, to ignite a flame of excitement for your davening. Kedushas machshavto la'avodas hatfila. Lechaven libo be'ema ve'yira ve'retet lemakom hu mekoimo shel oilam. Mekoimo shel oilam hu kavanas inyan atzimtzum v'hu mevor kanal. So I've said this before, that why learn Kabbalah? And if you ask the mashkiach in the yeshiva, should I learn these Kabbalistic sfarim? Should I learn the Nefesh HaHaim? Whatever. And the mashkiach answers, if it helps your davening, then yes. And if not, then not. So I think that's a great litmus test. And for me, it's greatly enriched me and enriched my davening experience to know how high God is. And people think, really, how can God listen to my Shmon Esrei and someone else's Shmon Esrei at the same time? People have they think God is this big, so they have no sense of how high this is. So learning about all these oilamos and about Adam Kadmon and about Or Ein Sof, it gives you a little bit of a perception, not of the reality of Atzmuso Yisbarach, but of how high and so forth. And
the ripples of our actions as well.
Exactly.
Impacting a multitude of worlds.
Exactly. So for me, it has great benefit over the years, and it's.
I wouldn't want to take it away from you.
Okay, thank you very much. So,
but if you burst into flame or a bird flying over your head does, stay in touch.
Okay, right. If my laptop, that gets unplugged or something like that, or you have a short circuit because of too much spirituality. So then you'll know. But meanwhile, before I reach those high heights of the universe, I'm going to call it a night and thank everybody for being here and for sharing. And looking forward to being together. We'll get together next week, Bezrat Hashem, and then we'll be off during Nisan.
Ashkar.
Take good
I
care,
like,
Dave. Enjoy your
I
travel.
like the graph. It was very colorful and creative. It
Oh,
wasn't
thank
one
you.
of these boring graphs. It was interesting to look at.
Thank you very much.
Ashkar on that.
Talking to you. Good night, gentlemen. Bye bye.